Okay, so we're at Mark 12.
Oh,
And just a real brief summary of last week. Jesus has gone to Jerusalem now, and we had Palm Sunday. And so everything that comes after this is him teaching in the temple, which is just a very different scenario from when he's going town to town and what he's doing. So we start right away with today's lesson. We're like, man, we've been lining it up. Crazy good. So who would like to read 12?
I can start.
Okay.
Then he began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard, put a fence around it, dug a pit for the winepress, and built a watchtower. Then he leased it to tenants and went to another country. When the season came, he sent a slave to the tenants to collect from them his share of the produce of the vineyard. But they seized him and beat him and sent him away empty-handed. And again he sent another slave to them. This one he beat over the head and insulted. Then he sent another, and that one they killed. And so it was with many others. Some they beat, and others they killed. He had still one other, a beloved son. Finally he sent him to them, saying, "They will respect my son." But those tenants said to one another, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." So they seized him, killed him, and threw him out of the vineyard. What then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the tenants and give the vineyard to others. Have you not read this scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is amazing in our eyes. When they realized he had told this parable against them, they wanted to arrest him, but they feared the crowd. So they left him and went away. Then they sent to him some Pharisees and some Herodians to trap him in what he said. And they came and said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not? Should we pay them or should we not?" But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, "Why are you putting me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me see it." And they brought one, and he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "Well, the emperor's." Jesus said to them, "Give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." And they were utterly amazed at him.
We can stop there. Any thoughts or insights on these two?
I was wondering who's like the third or fourth guy that tries to go collect when it's like these guys keep getting beaten and killed.
Yeah, right.
Hey, this is not working.
Yeah.
Why do I have to go?
Yeah. Now listen to me. Oh, no. Yeah.
It might work for me.
Yep.
The give to Caesar thing, I've never totally understood. I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard so many different interpretations of this. It's just it's clever on Jesus' part because he makes them figure out what he's meaning.
Right.
So instead
yeah,
of,
it's almost like a non-answer.
Yeah. He's like, well, what do you think belongs to the emperor, and what do you think belongs to God?
Yeah.
So now they're put on the spot. But the fact that the emperor's face is on the coin to some degree means that money belongs to him.
Mm-hmm.
But then they change the money in the temple, right? So there's, yeah.
Yeah.
I have a note here that says Jesus is making them reveal their relationship to the empire, meaning they're kind of in cahoots with the political powers trying to keep everything cool. And yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah, so he's going to be questioned a lot in the next few parables and stories. They're trying to make him say something stupid.
Right, they're trying to trap him or catch him.
I know there's a trend through a lot of this of we get all hung up on, well, we want to know what specifically material, physically things we're supposed to do, and he keeps saying that's not the point. And maybe that's kind of what he's getting at here. You know, we want to know if we're, because the paying taxes thing, they're like, well, paying taxes is betraying our people because you're not so.
Does he kind of say yes, though? Seems like he said,
It's kinda
you
like-
should pay your taxes.
Well, he's not really answering the question because he knows it's a trap. But the question is unfair. It's a when did you stop beating your wife question. It is an unfair question. It's a question asked in ill faith. So there is no correct answer to the
What would
question.
they have said? Like, were they saying it was they should pay taxes? I mean, I imagine they were, and the people were opposed to that.
Oh yeah, the people were very opposed to it.
But right, they would have had to say, yes, you do that, or they would have gotten in trouble with the Romans, right?
Right.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a betrayal of their people to pay the taxes at the same time. So it is.
But
Which
wouldn't
they
they be
do.
guilty of the same thing?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, well, they're hypocrites.
They are hypocrites.
Okay.
Yeah, there is no correct answer to this question.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point.
Yeah.
But it's not really a gotcha then. Like, who?
Because they want him to have to say it out loud.
Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
stupid question.
Yeah. Which side are you on, Jesus? And they want him to say something. If he says, no, you should pay the taxes, that's what's lawful, then the people will be super mad at him because they're being unjustly persecuted. And then if he says, no, you shouldn't, well, then he's upright, what do you call it? Insurrectionist.
Yep.
And he's refusing to do that.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, so I think he's reframing it in a way that's like not playing within their rules, not playing within their questions, but rather bringing it out really wide to like what really belongs to the emperor and what belongs to God. And you answer the question and you figure out what's really just and not.
And these taxes would be what you referenced in your sermon, right? Like they're paying taxes on their own land. Or that would be some of it at least.
They're paying taxes and then they end up having to like
Yeah.
do weird things and be in poverty and sell their land in order to pay. Yeah.
But even so, wouldn't the people be equally mad at the Pharisees because they're running things and
Yes.
They already were.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's a really cool book I read several years ago by Reza Aslan called Zealot. And he posed that Jesus was a zealot, but honestly his argument didn't pan out. He did give a phenomenal history of zealots and all the people who claimed they were the Son of God and the Messiah before, after, and around Jesus. And they were all incredibly violent. And he explained the powder keg of political, like what was going on in the culture, like really well. And so Jesus would have seemed like, okay, it's another one of these guys. And in some ways they were, because the people were so behind him, if he'd said, all right, everybody, get them, he would have had all these people ready to fight. But he never did that. But there were a lot of zealots and a lot of people who were trying to lead insurrections and become the next Messiah and throw out the Romans. And
Judas Iscariot was a zealot, right?
yeah, which is very interesting. Yeah.
There were a bunch of uprisings and rebellions that did happen around this time too.
Yeah.
They were all put down, but
Yeah.
some extremely violently.
Yeah.
I get what you're
Really
saying,
bad.
Ben. Like, yes, the Pharisees are just pointing out their own hypocrisy, but it seems like they were just trying to pretend that it was Jesus saying these things,
yeah,
backing these things.
There is a very good reason why they would have wanted to discredit Jesus. He's very frightening to them.
All right, you want to keep going?
Sure. Some Sadducees who say there is no resurrection came to him and asked him a question, saying, Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no child, the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. There were 7 brothers. The first married, and when he died, left no children. The second married the widow and died, leaving no children. The third likewise. None of the 7 left children. Last of all, the woman herself died. In the resurrection, whose wife will she be? For the 7 had married her. Jesus said to them, Is not this the reason you are wrong, that you know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God? For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. As for the dead being raised, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the story about the bush, how God said to him, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob? He is God not of the dead, but of the living. You are quite wrong. One of the scribes came near and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he answered them well, he asked him, "Which commandment is the first of all?" Jesus answered, "The first is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There are no other commandments greater than these." Then the scribe said to him, "You are right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one, and besides him there is no other. And to love him with all the heart, with all the understanding, with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as yourself. This is much more important than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices." When Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." After that, no one dared to ask him any question. While Jesus was teaching the temple, he said, "How can the scribes say that the Messiah is the son of David?" David himself, by the Holy Spirit, declared, "The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet." David himself calls him Lord, so how can he be his son? And the large crowd was listening to him with delight. As he taught, he said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." He sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came in and put in 2 small copper coins, which were worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had, all she had to live on."
Okay. So the Sadducees did not believe that, they believed once you're dead, you're dead. Nothing else happened. And so basically, there are a lot of religious leaders of different names, and they had different beliefs. There was not one unified Jewish belief, like we think. Just like early Christianity was very, very diverse in their beliefs and in their makeup and everything. So the Sadducees were trying to prove with this ridiculous scenario that resurrection is stupid. And so Jesus is basically like, marriage is for earth. Marriage isn't for heaven. Like, you're confusing what we need to get around on earth with the way it's going to be one day. And God is the God of the living, not the dead. So that means there has to be life beyond death.
It's kind of funny. My aunt's doing all this genealogy work. Well, she's retired, and like at some point, like up the family chain, like great grandpa or something. They immigrated from Sweden, and then like his wife dies, so then he sends for the sister, and then marries her, and then has more kids with the sister.
Wow.
It's like awesome. It's like, yeah, that was the thing, I guess. I don't know.
Interesting. That is interesting.
Would that have been in like the 19th century?
Oh,
Or before
that
that
was
even?
like, I think before that.
Wow. What was Jesus' point in bringing up this thing? How can the scribes say that the Messiah is the son of David?
Oh, I know.
It's kind of weird.
It's so weird. All right.
David himself calls him Lord, so how can he be his son? It's
I don't
different because
know
it's
why he was
Jesus
sitting
kind of
there.
posing a question to them, trying to maybe be sneaky instead of the opposite.
He poses
Okay.
an unanswered question.
Yeah, I have a couple notes. It says the son of David can't have a higher title than David. I think so. Messiah is the son of David. So does that make him lower or equal or higher to David? And then David calls, assuming he's sort of predicting the future Messiah, calls him Lord. So how can he be his son? So in that way, I guess Jesus is saying that the Messiah is greater than David. It's a weird
Hmm.
little,
Mm-hmm.
it's a weird little thing.
Is this only in Mark?
Yeah, I think
I wonder
so.
if it's something that has a cultural context that we have lost.
I know.
Maybe.
Because it makes no sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it doesn't even make semantic sense to me.
Yeah.
True.
There was so much conversation about who the Messiah would be, and people looking for the Messiah, and if Jesus knew that people thought he was the Messiah, he might have been trying to
Mm-hmm.
flesh things out, but yeah, it's kind of
Okay.
yeah. So this widow's mite, the widow's offering thing, comes right after him denouncing the scribes, and he says that basically they're wealthy and they have privilege and they devour widows' houses.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden a widow appears and gives the last bit of money she has to the treasury. And most of the time we hear this as Jesus praising her. And he probably is touched by her sincerity. But at the same time, to me, this reminds me of, adult children who go to their elderly parents' house and find out that they've spent their pension giving it to some televangelist, because the televangelist was like, constantly asking and sending them stuff and asking for more and more money. And they just basically got duped or manipulated into giving away all this money. To me, that's what this feels like.
Yeah, it's an odd pairing.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I hadn't before realized it was paired this way.
Mm-hmm. I mean, shouldn't the treasury be helping the widow,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like all the rich people put their money in honor of God, and then they find out who the widows are, and then they take care of them. But instead, you have the widow who's giving her last bit.
The widow story is a lot bitterer when you realize that, wait a minute, the treasury is what pays those scribes' salaries
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that we just heard are so nasty.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that could be true of so many things, that if the religious systems in place are so universal, like, nope, this is the way you have to do things, that the people who are already struggling are now struggling worse because of it, something's wrong. And I think about I read a book by a woman who was abused as a young child in her church nursery school that she went to, and so she had like feelings of worthlessness and that I didn't realize this, but when you grow up with so many adverse childhood experiences, it affects your brain, like literally changes your brain. So you can't focus, you can't do certain things, you get triggered by certain things. And as she was in church, she was often blamed for being restless and things that were like literally symptoms of trauma. And then she'd come to church and sing, Amazing Grace that saved a wretch like me. And those words would just hit her because she felt worthless. She felt bad, right? So, and then she talks about how, because she studies religious trauma, and or how religion affects traumatized people. And she said that a lot of times people who are experiencing trauma and the symptoms of trauma will do behaviors that are often called sinful. And then when they go and ask, how can I do better? Pastors say, I would have done the same thing. They're like, pray, read the Bible. They give them certain instructions that aren't going to heal their trauma and are often difficult to do when you have trauma. Like meditate for 20 minutes. I can't meditate.
Yeah.
My brain won't
Yeah.
let me calm down. So that's such a great example of like, if religion were trauma informed, then that would mean that we would be aware, and religion should be helpful and supportive of people experiencing trauma, not blaming them for not being able to do these things. And that makes me think, I'm relating that to this poor widow as being someone who already has nothing and is convinced by her religion to give even more, instead of being the recipient, the one who is made better because of the religious system.
I had another thought. You mentioned in your sermon today about the parables meant to make us feel uncomfortable. I wonder if this is one of these. Maybe that's why these two are paired together.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's easy to hate on the scribes because, oh yeah, man, those people who are rich. It's easy to hate on rich people because you can always imagine somebody richer than you.
Yeah, it's never you.
There's
right?
got to be somebody richer than you, and then because I'm not the richest person, there's somebody richer than me. So those nasty people. I'm not the richest, right? Yeah. But then somebody poorer than you that has been giving everything, and you know you haven't been giving everything. You held stuff back, of course, and then you think at her like, oh my gosh. I've benefited because of what she gave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is one of those tough ones, like with pairing it to a rich man getting into heaven's like camel going through the eye of the needle, where you're like, ugh. I mean, like compared to everyone else in the world, like we're all like super rich.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
Yes.
what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Until your sermon today, I never once thought about the vineyard that the Pharisees were offended because they thought of themselves as the landlords.
Yeah.
And yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
And
And they're realizing, hey, I'm warning they're going to rise up against you because they're ticked off.
Yeah.
And
Ooh.
yeah, they probably were thinking that, realizing, yeah, we're going to have a revolt on our hands because we're benefiting, and this is happening again here.
Mm-hmm.
Realizing, wait a minute, we are the scribes, and
Mm-hmm.
hey, we're, yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting thing because like it's been long pointed out that the Vatican is incredibly wealthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have so much treasures and stuff like that, and the higher up you get in power, the more glorious your outfit looks. And Pope Francis kind of shirked that tradition by dressing lower than his popely status.
Mm-hmm.
And it is just curious. There's nothing against beauty. I mean, beauty and beautiful things are great, and it's not always as simple as everything needs to be plain and simple because there's poor people, right? But it is interesting to wonder about the budget. If budgets are moral documents, where is the money? Where are the priorities for wealthy religious places? And some are wonderful, very generous. You know, lots come in and a lot goes out. But not always.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is he the current Pope, Francis?
Yeah.
I get them confused. Okay.
Yeah.
The one before him had a pretty good reputation, right? That Benedict.
And
or
He
whoever.
did. He did for the most part. Yeah.
And from what we know of Francis, is he pretty good or no?
I mean, he's probably one of the most progressive
Okay,
popes.
well, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
And he's said things that make progressive non-Catholics pretty happy, and he's made a lot of conservative Catholics really upset.
That's probably a good thing.
Yeah, but he's
Still some
like,
hornet's nests.
everyone's like, keep going, Francis, keep going, because he said some things that just so, like, you know, women will never be priests, and he's moved the needle with LGBTQ and saying, like, yes, they're beloved children of God, and, you know, but it's just like there's a wall that
Baby
you won't
steps, yeah.
go behind,
Yeah.
past.
Yeah.
So
It's like they can bless their unions, but it's not marriage.
Yeah.
it's not marriage, and
Yeah.
exactly.
But it's still a step in the right direction.
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
Yeah.
Small. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like it's only so far,
Mm-hmm.
but it is progress. But yeah.
All right,
We go
Christy,
home?
do you want to
Sure.
read 13?
The destruction of the temple foretold. As he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, I am he, and they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places, there will be famines. This is but the beginning of the birth pangs. As for yourselves, beware, for they will hand you over to councils, and you will be beaten in synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings because of me, as a testimony to them. And the good news must first be proclaimed to all nations. When they bring you to trial and hand you over, do not worry beforehand about what you are to say, but say whatever is given you at that time, for it is not you who speak, but the Holy Spirit. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise against their parents and have them put to death, and you will be hated by all because of my name. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. But when you see the desolating sacrilege set up where it ought not to be, let the reader understand, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. The one on the housetop must not go down or enter the house to take anything away. The one in the field must not turn back to get a coat. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that it may not be in winter, for in those days there will be suffering, such as has not been from the beginning of the creation that God created until now. No, and never will be. And if the Lord had not cut short those days, no one would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, whom he chose, he has cut short those days. And if anyone says to you at that time, Look, here is the Messiah, or Look, there he is, do not believe it. False messiahs and false prophets will appear and produce signs and omens to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But be alert, I have already told you everything. Should I do one more? It seems like it's part of it. But in those days, after that suffering, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven.
So, a lot of what Jesus is talking about seemed to happen around 70 AD. And this is where there was sort of one big, massive revolt. And the emperor was like, crush them. Like, we're so sick of these little backwater Hebrew people causing trouble. Just demolish them. And so they destroyed the temple, and there was blood running down the streets. Like, it was awful. It was awful. But in the years leading up to that, obviously there were Christians, and there would have been great pressure to be part of the violent insurrection. And Jesus is not about violence, and so he would have been talking about a third way, right? Like, it doesn't have to be binary. We're fighting against the Romans. We're on the side of the Romans. There's another way. There's a way of nonviolent resistance, and but yet people won't understand that. And so when he talks about, brother will be against brother and father and will be against child, there was a kind of an accusation against Christians for their behavior or their lack thereof, right? For their doing things differently, and it would have torn some families apart. And then, of course, when the Roman government came, when the army came, there was no time, and so many people died, and some people just fled. So this is a really interesting warning. It's like violence begets a violence, and it's going to be a horrible day. And for people who can just run. Like, it's a very interesting, like, vision of what was coming.
So you don't think any of this is about end times, as people have interpreted it?
No, I don't, because this assumes that the end times is like a single day of violence.
Right.
And the Left Behind series comes from this very recent, it was the 1850s that this guy put together this verse from here and this verse from here and this verse and came up with a timeline that was completely arbitrary and made up. And even the verse, one will be taken and one will be left behind in the vineyard, literally was one person being killed and one person making it, with the army coming. But it's so much more exciting to think that the end times of the world is going to be this big, violent, crazy time with dragons, and that's pretty exciting, right? I think this has much to do with Jesus coaching his younger disciples about what the future might look like, and that they will be hauled in front of councils, they will have their family disown them, there will be violence, and how will you be? Who will you be in these times? That's very applicable to today. Who are we to be in this time with all of this stuff going on? And if we act just like everybody else, then is that true discipleship?
And what is the desolating sacrilege?
My note here says it refers to the pagan desecration of the temple in Daniel 9. Yeah.
Okay.
But when do they think Mark was written?
They think Mark was actually written when the temple, shortly after the temple
That's kind
was
of what I was
destroyed.
wondering.
Yeah, so these events would have
very
been
fresh in people's minds.
Yes, they would have been very, very. People would have experienced this themselves, and so they could almost see this as Jesus predicting it, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We're just not 100% sure how many things in the Gospels were written by the original author and put into Jesus' mouth in backwards, or how much Jesus had the gift of of being able to see forward, which is a thing, and what scribes throw in, like, let the reader understand. Clearly, Jesus did not say that. So we know that these Gospels are pieced together and woven together in an artistic way for certain community and a certain purpose.
Well, his disciples, or his disciples' children, would certainly still be alive at the time that happened, so he could have warned them about bad things are going to happen. And generally, here's some good advice, because I don't want you guys to fall prey to the kind of circle of violence that has torn apart and perpetuated this nastiness. That's not the reason I came.
Yeah, and there were people who claimed to be the Son of Man, and there were people who, lots of would-be messiahs, as I mentioned before, and yet they came with violence, and they came with a very predictable pattern. And he's just sort of saying, look, this stuff's just going to happen, so just don't think it's the end. Don't think it's... Yeah.
And yet I'm sure they did. I can't imagine living through that.
Yeah.
That would have seemed like the end.
That would have seemed like the end.
Have faith that it isn't. That's why I say run away.
Right.
Don't make it your last stand.
And how often have we heard in our lifetimes alone people predicting that the end times are coming during Y2K, or I remember a few scares during the 80s and such, where so-and-so said that the end times are coming from these signs, and we go to school anyway, and it's like, well, it's going to happen. Well,
Not much you can do about it.
No, there isn't.
And lo and behold, we went home at the end of the day and woke up the next morning.
That's what live like the end is not coming, because then you're ready.
Should I finish off?
Yeah.
13? Okay. From the fig tree, learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near, at the very gates. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But about that day or hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Beware, keep alert, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey, when he leaves home and puts his slaves in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on the watch. Therefore keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to all, keep awake.
So the metaphor of sleeping and awake is universally used. And being asleep literally just means to not really be aware, not and ignorant, and you're basically making decisions and following along in life based off of what's expected from your culture and your family, and you're a product. You're literally a product of your genes, and you're a product of the culture, and you just go around you're sleepwalking through your life. And this gurus around the world have talked about this image of that is most people. That's almost all of us. And to wake up, to be enlightened, is a very powerful, radical thing in which you suddenly realize and you're free from the conditioning that runs most of our decisions. And you're able to actually see things where they are. And just a great example is how we see people. Like you see a human being and you immediately have 50,000 judgments and postulations of who they are and what's going on. You never just greet it and go, hello, fellow human being. What's your deal? Like, we don't do that. We're not open like that. We've got all this conditioning that's been taught us, and we do it to ourselves, too. Like I said, I just had this huge epiphany this week that I did not realize that I had this, like, guilt tape going, if you were a good pastor, if you were a good Christian, if you were a good human being, you would sign this petition, give money to this, share this post, blah, 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 blah. And there was just so much energy was going out with all these shoulds. And I wasn't aware to that. I was asleep to that particular part. So I'm awake to some things, but to that I was asleep. So Jesus is saying, in many ways, there is an awakeness to what's going on where you don't behave the way everyone's behaving. You see the world differently. I believe that's what the kingdom of God is that you're awake to God's reality and activity and presence, and you're participating in it rather than, this table is nothing but a table, right?
Yeah.
And is it a good table or is it a bad table, Like we put so much on such little things.
And isn't that the whole point of this whole woke movement that has become kind of almost a hot topic or it's isn't politicized anyway, where you become, they're trying to make us uncomfortable about even talking about these things, I think, saying that this is just too woke. Jesus' teachings are just too woke, it seems.
Right, look at me.
They are woke because they are awake. They've woken up to a deeper, truer reality than the surface that most of us live by. And there's so many different things that we can wake up to. I feel like George Floyd really was the first time I woke up to the depth of racial injustice in our country.
Wow.
I always thought, clearly they must be working on this and things are getting better. And that was the first time where I realized, no, they won't get better until. So I was asleep to that, even though I felt like I was, on the right side or whatever. And there's other things where you're kind of wake up one light bulb at a time and go, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. I feel like I could keep going on and on. Any other thoughts?
Well, those are some good thoughts.
Yeah. some of the hugest goalposts directing us, or lampposts directing us in the right way of waking up, are compassion and joy and non-judgment. So that's something I'm working really hard on, is just noticing all the ways that I bring judgment and condemnation to myself and to others, even in the smallest ways. He shouldn't have done that. She shouldn't have said that. Who am I to say he shouldn't have done that? If I were him, I probably would have done the exact same thing, living in his life. Who am I to judge that? Maybe that's exactly what he needed to do right now. Just even in the smallest ways, we're just judging ourselves and each other. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. But I did.
You're right, and it is constant. I've noticed that about myself. Someone walks in a room, a stranger, I've already made 5 judgments about them.
Yeah.
Immediately.
Yeah.
It's sick. It's a sickness.
Yeah.
Is it a sickness, or is it just our brains doing what they do?
Maybe.
Being aware of it lets us decide whether that is something that we can allow to restrain us, or just something we go, okay, is that helpful or not?
Right.
I mean, we are trained to notice people acting suspiciously, and and we're hardwired to notice differences. This person seemed like someone who belongs to the herd, someone we're familiar with, or is this a newcomer that we should?
This is someone that's going to hurt me.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's what our inner mind's processing as we're trying to ease back a little bit, just to give the person half a chance to show who they really are.
But we're not very good at it.
Yeah.
Because we're so painted over with poor judgment. So we're bad at it. That's what's interesting, is really enlightened, awake people who've worked really hard to erase judgment, they still discern. So they'll meet someone and they actually can receive that person much more realistically. And so they know if that person is open, closed, safe, not safe, based off of actual perception rather than their mind projecting what they think. So sometimes we might have this idea that a enlightened, awake person is just running around going, I love you, and then they get mugged in an alleyway or something like that. But not necessarily. They're actually probably more attuned.
They're probably safer.
They're safer. They're probably more attuned to what's going on because they're not judging things constantly. They're discerning on a deeper level.
They're not judging based on things that don't matter, like what that person's wearing or how their hair looks, or.
I mean, think about. Sorry, this is very exciting for me. Just think about the things that we're getting told to be upset about. Who's using what bathroom?
Yep.
These issues have never mattered.
Yeah.
And there are kids being bullied and killed
Ugh.
because of issues that don't matter. So we're being trained in judgment and condemnation that has no bearing on our actual safety. And yet, the things that are actually happening, that are actually problems, are not being focused on or worked on by so many people. So that we're going to focus on made-up problems and train our judgment and condemnation to be worse and harder and more divisive, and not come together and focus on what's really hurting people in a genuine way. And that, to me, is the definition of being completely asleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so many people just get followed. They just follow into the outrage du jour, and it's what are we mad about today? I tried to follow those guys on Twitter, and it's a total bait and switch. And it's just every day there's a new thing, and the hundreds of people just immediately pile on. You're like, my gosh, people. What? Can't you see that he just does this to rile you up?
Oh man!
And they all do it. They'll have just 1 million followers, and every day it's and then it's on the mainstream news, and then it's a thing, and you're just
because people are either so.
Family gets into it. It's what are you mad about today? Well, this is yeah, I'm totally mad about that. I knew it because it was on Twitter last week, and now you're mad about it.
Like you mentioned,
We're mad about it 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Why are you mad about
Because
it now?
people are so
not a
angry
thing.
or scared or both that
Yeah.
they have to latch
Oh.
on to this stuff.
Well, there's a certain satisfaction in it, you know.
It is sort of
kind
a
of fun.
self-righteous
I just need to be mad. Yeah,
satisfaction.
it's
Yeah.
crazy. It's sad.
And then they
But
buy
I think though I don't disagree with anything that's said, but it's also just my last thing is a call against apathy. Like if you know and you're thinking like, oh, the end times are next year, like, well, what am I working hard for? I'd just be like, well, I'm just gonna take it easy and skate through. And I think his like warning is keep building your world to be better today and tomorrow and like work for the future. Otherwise, like what's the point?
Well,
So
here's
you
the-
don't know the time, then you're not gonna give up.
Yeah.
Well, here's the other thing about this. People keep reading this as the world's about to end.
Yeah.
But the lesson of the fig tree,
Yeah.
he describes a fig tree, recognizes that summer's coming. He's not saying the world's going to end. He just says
Yeah,
the Son of Man
right.
is coming. He
It's a new
never
season.
says the world's going to end. People just assume that's what it means.
Right.
Something's going to happen. Maybe it's going to be good. And if you're not ready, you're going to miss it.
And isn't that
If you
way
just
more?
didn't pay your bills and didn't
Yeah.
stop eating because you figured there wasn't any point, you're not going to be here for it.
Yeah. And isn't that more exciting to worry about and things that you can't prove are going to happen? You know,
Yeah.
than like that really wraps up so much of humanity is the fear and the worry,
It sure
and
does.
rather than
Yep.
just being present. Eckhart Tolle quotes this exact parable of Jesus, and he says he's talking about being present here and now, waking up and seeing what is, and not getting pulled back in the past or dragged into an imaginary future that doesn't exist. But he's like, 9 times out of 10, if you look at where you are and you say, are you okay? I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the story in our head that's making us afraid and sick and scared. And I bet Jesus knew that. He knew it's the stories in our head that cause all the problems.
That is the hardest thing to do, is just live in the now and open your eyes to what is happening right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be present.
But yeah, that's a struggle of mine.
Going through some of the therapy stuff with Amy, or these exercises where you're just living in the moment, noticing things
Yeah.
around you.
Yes.
And it's amazing how grounding that is.
Yep.
Yes.
Helps a lot with anxiety,
It
which
really
I've been in
does.
therapy for too. But
Isn't
it's
that
just
amazing how
everything with life. Like
Calming
just
it is. Mhm.
take a step back.
It's hard to have faith, and realizing that faith doesn't mean, believe in God, whatever that's supposed to mean.
Right.
Yeah. Believe in God and it'll be okay. What is that supposed to mean?
Yeah,
How is
yeah.
that no, it just means just trust that it's going to be okay. So stop worrying for a little bit. That's really what it boils down to. So you can just set it aside for a little while and just focus on now. It's really not complicated, but we make it complicated.
Yeah. 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 And I think the next few chapters, which we'll read next week and we'll finish off next week, because in 2 weeks already we'll do a rehearsal for the Passion Play.
Are we that close to be done?
I know, we are. We
I'm
just
not
have
sure.
14 and 15 and a little bit of 16 left. So
That's at the end.
it's pretty much Passion Week now, so.